All right. So, welcome everybody. I know we don't have a whole lot of people on here right now. We've got our first ever episode of Audie Murphy's Law. The whole point of this podcast is going to be to kind of discuss some things that we deal with in the industries that we work in, transitioning out from being service members, and how we translate those skills into what we do every day. So, our first guest for the show is going to be TJ Ware, who is the owner of Paradise Claims. And he can correct me here in just a minute, but I believe he is also one of the partners in NTS, formerly what is Name That Shingle. It's specific to the public adjusting and construction industry. TJ's got a lot of exposure in the industry. A lot of people follow him, know who he is. He's a great influence on a lot of younger folks coming into the industry. And I think a lot of people may not know that TJ is a veteran. So we're going to kind of discuss some of that stuff. We're going to talk some family life, some transition out of the military, how some of those skill sets have been able to be utilized in what we do now. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring TJ in. Hey, TJ, how are you, man?
Daniel, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So was I correct on the introduction, right? So obviously you own
that's
the
right.
firm.
Paradise Claims, been doing that since 2008. I had a roofing and electrical contracting company before that. And then I founded NTS in 2021. And I'm the CEO and majority partner there. And
Okay.
John Cenac also runs that company with me.
Very cool. So I think a lot of people, and I know the first couple interactions that you and I had together, I was not aware that you were a vet. And I think that that's one of those things that kind of follows us regardless of whether we solicit that fact or not, right? The people who are close to us obviously know that we're veterans. And I think industry wide, though, I think you see kind of guys doing one of two things, right? They either kind of under or downplay what they did in their service for whatever reason. They don't want that to be a selling point necessarily, or you see the exact opposite where it's kind of overutilized and you see them use that in their name and the logos and all that. And I don't think either one of those is wrong necessarily, but have you found, in your years in this industry, well, let's back up a little bit. When did you serve? Because you were a Marine Corps veteran, correct?
That's right. Yeah. I went in right after 9/11 and I got out in November of 2005.
Okay. And what did you do while you were in?
I was in aviation supply.
Oh, okay. So I actually, I was a petroleum supply specialist. My first 7 years in, I was in an aviation battalion. So we did, I was an Apache helicopter fueler. So cool environment, pretty relaxed, at least on the Army side of things, because it's full of warrant officers and there's not a whole lot of the customs and courtesies are a little bit more relaxed in that environment. I think everybody calls themselves by their first names and all that fun stuff. So
it's not quite that relaxed in the Marine Corps, but I love aviation. I've always loved aviation.
Mm-hmm.
For me, after I got out, man, I had a really tough transition and I went through a lot of shit. And because of that, I think that's why I shied away from presenting myself to everybody as a veteran, because I was a little bit jaded. Rightfully so, man. A lot of us have been through a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to get to a place where I show that pride a little bit more. But I've been a little bit battered and beat up, as have many veterans. And we've been through a lot of challenges. And I want to embrace the good things about the service and about veterans. And I love veterans. I always have the great camaraderie with other vets and people that have served and combat veterans. And I do care a lot about them. But, when I got back from Iraq originally in 2004, I went down
So
to...
you were in the initial push?
No, I was in the second wave, OIF 2. Yeah, OIF 2. I got married on January 10th of 2004, and I went to Iraq on February 6th.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And unfortunately that's a common story for a lot of folks. And I know I was in a rapid deployment division. So, and being in the 101st, we were supposed to be able to deploy anywhere in the world in 72 hours and so on and so forth. It's not like the Iraq war. Nobody was tracking that it was going to happen. Right. So we were the first aviation asset to go through Ali Al Salim and cross the border in March of 03. So I was there till April of 04. So we would have crossed paths essentially at some point. And I always find that's interesting, especially guys that served in the timeframes that we did, because I did from actually prior to September 11th. I was in the middle of basic training when the towers fell, which was a complete shit show. And then I got medicaled out in 2012. So guys who lived in that generation, we kind of got pushed into this, I don't know, for lack of a better term, but like this hero complex, right? Like Americans have this thing where they see a person in uniform, they want to assume that they've done something heroic, something that is profound. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's not necessarily the case, but we still have to deal with that when we come back, right? And so, I want to segue back into what you were saying there, where you want to utilize and capitalize on some of those positive things that you were able to experience while you were in the Marine Corps.
Well, goodness, sorry. I think probably a lot of us had to come to terms with the whole war in general, especially the Iraq War. And so I saw a lot of the older Vietnam guys after I got out. I saw them still struggling through things because of all of the issues that were involved in going to Vietnam. And then it turned out that a lot of those same types of issues were involved with Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction. I was over there and I saw the contractors and the companies in there working, and I began to understand how things work a little bit more. And I began to read, if you've ever read War's a Racket by Smedley Butler, great book.
Smedley.
Yeah. And he talks
about him the other day. Yeah.
he talks about how the government essentially used him as a mercenary to take over fruit companies and countries in Central America and all of these different things. So, people like you and I, we agreed when we were young men to go fight and give our life for this idea of democracy and freedom. And essentially, through the transition that I went through after getting out, eventually I came to a place where, I no longer supported the war in the same way that I did before. And I didn't believe when I was young, I didn't believe that you could support the troops and not support the war. And later my views changed.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. Absolutely a massive thing. And I think that's a maturity thing. Right. And, how old were you when you joined? Because you and I are close to the same age.
I was 17. I turned 18 in basic.
Okay. So I was 18 when I went into basic training. So we're right in that same window. And I think that when you go in that young and that's all you know for your adult life, right? When you transition out and you see how the civilian world works, and it's not that it's good, bad, or indifferent, but it is definitely not the same. Right. And so you're on the receiving end of a lot of that constant, you need to be prideful that you're wearing the uniform, and especially in the Marine Corps. I mean, we'll call it what it is. There's always this really good sibling rivalry. And I know you've met my wife, both of her brothers were Marines. Like, I married into a family of Marines, which is always fun for me. But, there is that, especially in the Marine Corps. You guys start out with no one is badder than you. You're a killer. You're the best on the planet, so on and so forth. And that's great while you're in and while you're wearing the uniform, but it's really hard to correlate that skill set out into the civilian world, right?
And in your families too. We've seen so many families break down in the military. Fortunately, mine made it through very barely did it make it through. We were looking at getting divorced around the time that I got out of the service, because of some of the things that I had been through and how the trauma had affected me.
Yep.
And
I'm sure you lost friends and you had family members that kind of looked at you that weird way, and you got to play the game just like everybody else who came back from combat of did you kill anybody? Did you see dead bodies? Is Iraq hot? That same string of questions all the time. And good for you and Jackie for making it through that. I mean, I did a total of 4 deployments between Iraq and Afghanistan. And, so it's the old, like the partridge in the pear tree thing, right? So I did 4 deployments and had 3 marriages and this, that, and everything else. So right. I think luckily for me, I think Amy would have been able to navigate that flawlessly, right? But fortunately, she never had to. So her and I met after all 4 of those deployments. So you do see that that breakdown of the family dynamic when one of the parents is not there. And now you guys have a bunch of kids. So how many kids did you guys have when you deployed? Had you guys started having kids yet?
We were expecting my oldest.
Okay.
So
and that's a completely new dynamic.
Newlyweds expecting a baby. And then I got over there in February, and I was in a rocket attack on March 18th of 2004, and I ended up coming back in May, and eventually got medically retired.
Gotcha. And I did see that, and it's one of those things, like as other service members we pick up on, right? When you see people's social media profiles and you see how they break down their military service. And I know at one point I had seen that yours said retired USMC, and somebody had asked me about it at one point in kind of casual conversation. And I said, look, the only way he would have been retired at that short time frame of service would have been medically retired. So something happened. He got medically retired. That's the only way you get retired in that capacity, right? And I think that's another thing that a lot of people don't realize. The toll that it takes on you physically, the toll that it takes on you mentally. And we could do a whole nother show on, PTSD and all that. I do want to touch on some of that stuff because I know for me, I got out in 2012. It probably wasn't until 2014 that I was actually able to, I think, what I would consider function as a normal human being, right? Yeah. It took a lot for me to lose that structure, try to figure out how, especially coming out of the military as an NCO, how does that management style, how does that deeply ingrained into your guys' lives that doesn't exist in the civilian world, right? If I go work for somebody, I'm not involved in their finances. I'm not involved in their marital disputes. I'm not involved in what their kids are doing and why their kid missed school. When you're in the military and you're in a leadership position, you're involved in all of that. So not only are you losing that structure, but you're losing that sense of, I need to make sure that all of these boxes are checked for this person, for them to be successful, right? And you get out in the civilian world and I don't care if you're successful, I'm going to be successful. And whatever happens to you, happens to you. And that it doesn't seem to parallel.
In general, there's a level of seriousness in the military that's just lacking out here in the civilian world. And I remember one time when I was running my electrical contracting company, we were doing this contract where we were installing new Coke Freestyle machines in 7-Elevens from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So we're running like third day running on no sleep. Right. And one of my guys had a breakdown and he was just got all emotional and he was upset. And he said, I can't keep doing this. And I said, listen, man, nobody's shooting at you right now. You're going to make it through this. Like you're going to be okay. Yep. And, it was interesting because to him, maybe that was one of the most difficult situations he had ever found himself in, but there wasn't any real danger there. And that's something that probably only people like you and I truly understand. War is something that you just can't understand it, I don't think, unless you've experienced it.
No, and you can, and your kids are older, a handful of them are anyway. I know my oldest is 14 and my youngest is 10, and they're starting to ask those questions, right? Where they have the movie version of what war looks like. They have the video game version of what war looks like. And it's not that we weren't subjected to that when we were kids. We watched Rambo and we watched the Predator movies and all these, military style movies. And if you go back even further, I know my wife's family was really big in like the old John Wayne movies. And, so we had our own interpretation of what that looked like. But now my kids are starting to ask those questions, right? And then you have to kind of shelter them to a degree from the adversity that maybe you had dealt with, but then in some weird way, you want them to understand that you can be in those massively adverse situations and still come out of it and be functional, right? And still be respectable and still be a good dad or still be a good brother or husband or whatever. And that's a really hard conversation to have with not only your kids, but people whose only perception of what war really is what they've seen in the movies, the bullshit they see on the news, and what they see in video games, and that's tough.
It's so much different than that. And it's such a hard thing to explain. I did not function well for years.
Mhm.
after coming back. And I actually, I struggled with substance abuse for a while. So I got out in November of 2005. And early in the war, there weren't very many resources for the veterans. And I fell
There's
through
still
some
not now.
cracks. That's terrible. It breaks my heart to hear that. And I struggled with substance abuse, and I almost lost everything I had, my family, my wife, my children.
Mhm.
And I cleaned up in November of 2006. And ever since then, that hasn't been an issue for me, thank God. But
Yep.
unfortunately, so many of our brothers and sisters have fallen to substance abuse, overdoses, and suicide. We see it all the time in our online groups.
Oh yeah, and you almost become desensitized to a lot of that too, and that's unfortunate, right? And that's a conversation that I've had plenty of times, and I know for a lot of, and I actually have a couple of my old soldiers watching this right now, and that if anything, that shows that the brotherhood always exists, right? That family element still exists there, and there's still a mutual respect for each other. But I find myself pretty consistently being the one, if there's something bad that happens, if one of the guys that we served with committed suicide or was in a car accident or whatever, I find myself continually being the one that gets that phone call, and it's like, hey man, Darren, we just found out this morning Darren committed suicide. And you're like, shit, okay, I'll make some more calls. And then you have to kind of stop whatever emotional reaction you have to be able to push that information out to other people who give a shit, right? And you do. It's a weird thing. You become desensitized to it, and you have to find your own time to grieve. And sometimes that never happens. And then when you start to look at it that way, you understand how some of these people get into substance abuse and the suicidal thoughts and the adrenaline, the need for the adrenaline, right? If any, the more people that come on the show and the more we have these conversations, I think one of the things that's going to continually come up is that, right? Especially guys who have experienced real combat, is that adrenaline, right? You
I
can't
also
replicate
believe
that.
I also believe this is why people like you and I thrive in the post-storm environment. Even as difficult and destructive as that can be,
Yeah.
we go in there and we thrive. And that's probably, you and I probably first met, I think, probably during Hurricane Laura.
Yeah. Right after Laura. Yep.
Down there in Lake
Church parking lot.
Charles.
Yep.
That's right, church parking lot. And so it's easy for us to operate in that environment. And Doug Quinn, who's now running the USDR, he is utilizing trauma victims to go down there and help serve storm victims, because they're going through a lot of trauma and loss too. And there's something important there. And people that have been through trauma and bad situations are able to serve those almost in a better way because they have a deeper understanding.
I'll agree with that. I think, and disagree with that at the same time, right? And I think for some folks, I always used to tell my guys when they would come in, and by the time I became a sergeant, like everybody, the younger guys, I had already deployed twice. Like I wasn't what you would consider green to the combat experience, right? And I always tell my younger guys, like, you have to understand that everybody has a box, and you can only hold so much shit in your box, and everybody's box is different. And once it's full, you have to either take shit out of the box or go buy a bigger box. And the reason that correlates to what you just said, in my opinion, is the existence of trauma and the ability to navigate that trauma. I think for some people filled their box up to the brim, and they may not be the best suited to sit in that environment.
Sure. No, I agree 100%. Now, you're hoping that 15, 18 years later, you
Right.
found a way to deal with these things and work through some of them so
Right.
that you can be of value to the people around you. But you're 100% right. And I tell people all the time, the analogy that I use is the oxygen mask when it deploys on the airplane. You have to put yours on first.
Yep.
Before you put the kids on. And that's been a challenge for me. And so I'm in a phase of caring about myself, trying to get in the gym, be healthy mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, so that I can be good for the people around me.
Yeah, and it's counterintuitive in the civilian world, right? Is that because when we're in, it's always about the people around you. it's not ever take care of yourself first. It's
Right.
always take care of everybody around you. So learning that skill set after the fact is it seems counterintuitive, especially again, when you join at 17, 18 years old and that's all you know for your adult life.
Sure,
Right.
absolutely. And I had no resources whatsoever. There was one doctor that I finally talked to at the VA that he finished my sentences for me. And that was a turning point for me
Yeah.
at that time. And it meant a lot to me that I felt like someone understood, what I had gone through.
Yeah. And that's huge. I remember when I got out and I sat with the mental health folks and I got out in a time frame where guys hadn't really started shifting into that 5th and 6th and 7th deployment, right? So you had those guys that lived at 4 and 5, and the VA was definitely not suited for somebody who had experienced that much time in a combat zone. So I remember sitting in out processing first, or after out processing, the first mental health appointment that I went to, and they're doing this full screening. And, I said, you're talking to me about things that aren't even what's bothering me. And I said, the system here is flawed. I said, I don't need to do this anymore. And that was at the end of the day, that was detrimental to me. If I probably would have sat there and sucked it up and had that conversation, maybe I would have taken something positive out of it. But at 29 years old, a 4-time deployee, you're not going to tell me shit that doesn't correlate directly to what I had dealt with. Right. And it's tough to impress upon people what that really looks like. It's just like the war conversation a minute ago. You can't tell people what war is like, right? You can tell them, you can show them all day what the after effects are. You can show people what the struggles are. But at the end of the day, people don't want to see that shit either, right? And as much as everybody wants to talk about how supportive they are, and I truly believe at their core that they are, but I know 3 people that I could call when I'm having my couple days a year that I don't need you to talk to me. I need to be isolated. I need to be by myself. I need to go cry in my room about the shit that's happened to me, whatever that is, right? Whatever level of breakdown I'm having at that point in time. There's maybe 3 people that I could call that are going to give you the right type of sympathy for that scenario, because that's the last thing we want as vets, is that kind of overbearing sympathy. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't need the I'm sorry. Sometimes it takes somebody else that has been in that environment to have that conversation with, that can understand the nuances of what you're doing.
100%.
So,
and that's a big challenge for veterans. When you come back from war, your family looks at you like you're some kind of monster, like they don't recognize you.
Yeah. Yep. And that's heartbreaking, right? I mean, I know that my dad was a corpsman in Vietnam. Right. And so it was, his understanding of what that looked a little bit different. And I think I expected to be able to have some conversations with him that we just never were able to have. And I remember talking to my mom about it and asking the question, like, why isn't Dad opening up? Like, why isn't this reciprocating? Right. I could sit here all day and talk about all the shit that I've been through in the last few years. And I said, it never comes back. He never gives me a comparable scenario or whatever. And I remember her telling me that it scared the shit out of him when I said I wanted to join the Army, right? Because he knew what that looked like, right? To what degree? Couldn't tell you, because we've never talked about it, right? Maybe very minimal. It may be incredibly traumatic. I don't know. But the point in that was that there was a shelter from him because he was scared for me, right? And I'm the youngest. And then my brother ended up joining the Air Force 5-6 years after I had been in the Army. And I remember giving him a bunch of shit about it. One, the Air Force absolutely suits his personality type. But I said, you gave me so much shit because I kept re-enlisting and kept volunteering to go and doing all this other shit. And you're like, you need to stop doing this. You're going to get yourself killed, so on and so forth. And then he goes and does it himself. And, so there's always a weird dynamic in how you end up in these places. But I think the most profound statement that I ever heard after getting out, I was in a job resume class that the VA made me sit through or something. And the lady looked at the entire class and she said, you have to understand, as a vet in this generation, when you go apply for a job, you go in for a job interview, you walk into a place, everywhere you go, you have a gun in your hand, regardless, right? If people know you're a veteran, everywhere you go, you have a gun in your hand. metaphorically speaking, obviously, right? But that's right. I mean, people look at you different when they realize that, hey, man, you may have been through some shit. And that was one of the first things that I remember telling my wife when we first met. I said, I don't ever want to walk into a room and people look at me and go, whew, that guy's been through a lot of shit. And I still, even to this day, I don't want people to. Do I
Yeah.
care if people know that I served and did all of that? No, I don't. I don't want it to be the basis of who I am as a person, right?
Right.
It is a personality trait. It is a period of my life that I went through, but I don't want that to be the single sole identifying factor of who I am, right?
My little brother is 5 years younger than me. And for 2 years, I tried to get him to join the Air Force. Finally, he did. And it did amazing things for his life. But my mom almost killed me for getting him to join after what I had gone through.
Yeah. My mom did the same because she thought I influenced that decision. I was like, oh, no. I had nothing to do with this. He did this all on his own. I'm the baby. I'm not influencing anybody into shit.
That's funny.
But again, I mean, we can go down a ton of rabbit holes there. This comment just came up from Tyler. Tyler's actually one of my old soldiers. We had one of the guys that we served with got in a car accident and got killed last week. And it's interesting when you see, especially social media the way that it is today.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't know the soldier version of this person. They only knew the civilian version of this person. And so that's another one of those just weird delineations that exist, right? Because even though you've served and I've served, we don't know each other in that capacity. We know that existed, but we don't know each other in that capacity. And I had to do a eulogy at one of my guys' funerals. I guess it was 2 years ago. And I realized as I was giving the speech that his family didn't know the same person that I knew. And they were hearing things about him that they never knew, personality traits that they didn't know existed, because you live in a completely different mindset. And every once in a while in the veteran community, and especially in our industry, right, you'll see these guys kind of exhibit some of those military personality traits, and you can just kind of ping up on it and go, okay, I get it. But you kind of forget a lot of times, I think, that the families don't know you in that capacity. That's a completely different person. That person is alien to them.
Right. And in our industry, a lot of people, they see the funny, silly, goofy social media version of me. And of course, that's probably the reason that they don't suspect that I'm a Marine Corps veteran and things like that. But that probably comes out a little more in the back office, when things need to get done.
No, that's right. I think that's one of those skill sets that evolves, is you have to find where it's applicable, right? Mm-hmm. But that's a good segue, right? So, do you see a correlation, and how do you, in your day-to-day now, whether it be from the family life or from what you do, because obviously your hands are in a couple different business endeavors, do you think that your service helps or hinders that?
I think it helps in a lot of different ways, really. I think in general, the military can be a wonderful thing for young people. I hire young people all the time and think to myself, God, I wish we were like Israel and everybody had to go serve 2 years, because some of the simple, a couple of things. Number one, people with this "I can't do this" mentality, like that wasn't a thing in the Marine Corps. They would tell you to run through that wall. You're going to kill yourself trying, and you're just you learn to push yourself so much harder and further that you can accomplish these great things. And the other thing is just the Marine Corps taught me a lot of basic things that sounds funny, but like clipping my fingernails and making sure my hygiene was on point. Showing up early. In the military, you show up late and that disrespects somebody. And that's how I behave now in business too. I don't show up late to places. There's a level of seriousness amongst veterans and a level of professionalism that a lot of the services, they kind of force that onto you. Like, if you can't pick that up, you're not going to last long in the military. And I appreciate some of that. And I wonder how a lot of young people were able to get to adulthood without any of that. And you see it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you noticed, and this is something that I know I do, and I'm curious, do you find yourself capped on that frustration level, right? Where in a scenario where you can see people getting irritated and you kind of expect that I'm going to fly off the handle in the very aggressive negotiating and that kind of stuff, where you just kind of stay capped at a certain level. There was always a joke at one of the last places that I was working that they always said I'm a steady 6, regardless of what's going on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm always a 6. And Amy and I were in a business meeting last week, and the guy was like, look, I'm not trying to piss you off. And I was like, there's nothing that has come out of your mouth that has even remotely gotten me frustrated. Like, do you find yourself in that scenario where it's like situations that I think the interpretation is it's, hey, I'm going to say something that's going to piss you off. You're just like, yeah, okay, keep moving.
That's a great point, because just everything is so abrasive in the military. The stuff that we say to each other, the people that we like, the things that we say to them, let alone the people we don't like. So yes, there's a little bit of that desensitization. And I like that. I'd rather be in that environment than have to worry about offending somebody.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that, man. And, again, it's that one, it's one of those skill sets that kind of transfer over, because from the moment you open your eyes to the moment you close your eyes, you're right. It's abrasive, until you get to your first year, you're actually at your duty stations and you're doing the 9 to 5 kind of garrison stuff.
Still, I mean, everybody in there, the things that they say to each other, they're not things that would be okay to say in a normal workplace on the civilian side. And I think they've cracked down on some of that stuff in the service. But that was one of the things that I liked about it in a way.
I was in the Army for the 2-month period that we did fucking stress cards, which was the biggest blemish in military history as far as I'm concerned. It didn't last, thank God.
Wow.
I did get a couple new Joes that came out from basic training, and they would have the card with them. And I'm like, listen, man, that does not exist here. You can go ahead and throw that thing in the trash. But then you wanted to pick your brain.
I don't think that I don't think the military is a place to do social experiments. God, I really don't. We've got a job, and it needs to be an efficient warfighting machine. So a lot of the bullshit is unfortunate. I'm surprised none of my kids have shown any interest in the military. I try to talk them into getting on the track to be a military pilot, because I thought that was the coolest job ever. I was young. I went in and enlisted, so I didn't really have that opportunity. Mm-hmm. But so far, none of my kids have shown an inclination. And sometimes I wonder, whether I'd want them to do that or not.
Yeah, and that's always a tough one, right? Is especially when your kids start to get to that age. I know my oldest is not even showing an indication, and he's 14, so he's more of, hey, when can I come and work for you? When do I get to be part of the family business, so to speak? And it's like, just because you're related doesn't mean you get shit, right? And I think if the military does anything, it removes that sense of entitlement from people a lot of times.
Absolutely. Like my kids, I've never given my kids hardly anything, but I give them opportunity to make money. And some of my kids have a lot of things because they work hard and they're industrious, and some of them don't. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's good for any young person. But if you have somebody who was successful in their military career, they're going to have a work ethic and they're going to have some professionalism. Yeah. And I like that. And that was a good thing for me. I probably wouldn't have fit in long-term because I'm kind of a visionary type. I want to do things new in different ways. Yeah. And it's hard to do that within the constraints of any government job.
I think if you'd been in the Air Force, you might have been okay. But the Marine Corps is definitely not going to give you that the opportunity to do things outside of the status quo.
I mean, it's a rough life too, and you realize it's designed for 18, 19, 20, 22-year-old people. Mm-hmm. It's not designed for guys like us now.
No, hell no. Look, I got a wild hair at my ass a few years ago, and I was like, I'm going to go to the recruiter. I'm going to see if I can go back in. And they were just like, look, man, go home. So, you're right. I mean, it is. And I think it really does set us up to be entrepreneurs and business leaders, because you have to, in order to make it, right, and you have to be able to work outside of the norm and create those new scenarios and create those new opportunities and be industrious. And that just sets us up to be successful in this. And it took me years to figure out that I didn't need a scheduled job and that consistent paycheck. And there are times that you look at it now and you're like, I kind of really could kill somebody for a consistent paycheck right now. But
No, I get it.
then there's the other half of the year where you're like, no, we're good.
One good thing I think probably about us being veterans is that we get a little carve out in the traditional millennial mindset. You know, people look at millennials, which I think we fall into. Or you're a millennial, right? Generation wise.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, these lazy, entitled kids. But then a lot of millennials are veterans, combat veterans. And so I think that may at least give us a little more credibility being part of this generation.
Yeah, I think so, because we're on the backside of it, right? It's unfortunately for our particular generation, it's the younger half of our generation that didn't have the Game Boys and the stay out till the street lights were on and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think they probably need to split our generation in half somewhere along the line and break it down.
Because none of us want to be grouped in with the other kids that that they identify as millennials, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I mean, there's always that correlation, and one of the things that I've seen as I got out is we've had different business conversations with different people, and I remember just last year we had a conversation with a company, and the guy said, "I love partnering, bringing in, hiring military vets." He said, "But the problem with them is they always want to bring a team of people with them." And I said, I get that from your guys who maybe didn't necessarily ever find themselves in a leadership position, maybe. But if you take some guy who's an E9 with 27 years of service, he's going to come in and solve the problem. He's not going to come in and be like, I need 15 people to do this. Right. I just like we're talking about lumping generations together. I don't think that you can lump military service together. Guys who served in the Marine Corps or the Army were generally in line with each other for the most part. Air Force and Navy, completely different. Coast Guard doesn't even get to play in the sandbox anymore. So, I don't think that you can just blanket statement military service, right?
For the types of people that join the military, which a lot of them are going to be lower socioeconomic status.
Oh, yeah.
I always said the military is the quickest way out of the ghetto. And I grew up on the streets as a kid. So I respect that. And I respect what it can do for communities and lift people up. So if you compare all of those people with their peers that they grew up with, maybe went to school with, I think by and large, the military veterans do come out quite a bit ahead. And we see a lot of them in business now that have had a lot of success. And, it's interesting. We're getting to this point in time, you see, where the generation of men and women who fought these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are now coming into government leadership. And we're going to see the experiences that were gained and the maturity that was gained through a lot of this transform generations to come, because now there are a lot of veterans that are getting involved. And I think they say 2% of the population has served in the military. 2%.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So it's cool, to have that behind us, I guess. I still do some stuff in Washington, D.C. now. And so I feel like maybe I have a little better understanding of certain things than some people do. Jessica's a good example there. Absolutely. So, you meet somebody who's had a successful military career or was in for several years, and you all of a sudden know, they're not at least a total shitbag, probably.
Right. Well, I always used to tell people, like, look, man, again, this goes back to the hero complex that I was talking about early on in this conversation. People don't realize that the military is just like working at Walmart, right? There's somebody bagging the groceries and he's going to do a shit job, and you're going to send him out in the parking lot to push carts in, right? Like the caliber of people, just because they're wearing a uniform, doesn't change, right? So you have those people that you have to keep your thumb on. You have those people that you can kind of give that free rein to say, hey, this is the task that I need done. I don't care how you do it, just get it done. And so, there's always that I think misunderstanding of what that looks like from a service perspective. And then you do see these guys that are coming out and getting into running for, political office. I've got a friend of mine who is a 20 some odd year Green Beret, and he's running for office in Arizona, and I would love to get him on this show at some point, but I also don't want to ever put him in a position where somebody uses some shit for political progress or whatever. But
well, I'm sure that he would probably want to do this because politicians like to get all the press they can. But
right.
I think it's important that we elect veterans, especially war veterans, because those are the people that decide whether our children will be off fighting another war. And so I think it's important that the people are there with the right perspectives.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think, and that was part of my motivation for starting this. And, it's in its inception. We'll see where it goes. I mean, if it turns out to be something big, it'd be awesome. But I'm an expectation person and a realist, right? This may be 20 shows long and then we shut it down. I mean, it is what it is. But I want it to be more than that for one reason. Again, I've never been that person who very actively pushes the I'm a veteran on people. It's just not who I am. However, I kind of got tired, as much as I respect a lot of these people's opinions, I kind of got tired of the these kind of top tier one guys who are now doing all the motivational speaking, the Bedros Scullions, I don't know, maybe I'm using the wrong name, but there's a handful of Walton Goggins guys like going through buds. And you have these guys who lived in that tier one environment. Nothing that they went through is applicable to what we do on a daily basis, right? And the jobs that they've found as they've gotten out correlate to that specific skill set. There's not a whole lot of people doing the kind of everyman conversation, right? If you need that motivation and you need that person telling you in your ear, like, get off your ass, go run 100 miles on a Tuesday because it's good for you and nobody can stop you and do it. Great. If that's who you are as a person, I have zero issue with that. I don't think that that's the case for so many people. And we see it very predominantly in this industry. When I started going through and trying to find people that could be on this show, right? I wrote a list down of like 20 people that I knew were vets. And then I started going through my Facebook and I started going through, because I'm sure yours is the same way. There's probably 300, 400 people on your Facebook that through the industry, but you don't know shit about them. Right. Mm-hmm. And as I started diving off through, then it was, oh, I didn't know that person was a vet. Oh, I didn't know that person was a vet. And then you get other people going, hey, did you know that John's a vet? And you're like, no, I had no idea. And you see all these people in different levels of management, different levels of ownership. And you see that there is a fit, there is a mold for me and you, the people who were not those tier one guys. We didn't live in this special, spooky, secret squirrel shit environment that forced you to have these very obscure, very black and white perceptions on things, but we also didn't live on the opposite side of that. So somewhere,
and I'm very thankful now. I know some of the special operator guys. I know some of those groups. I will never be that moto guy. I'm sorry.
That's a Marine Corps statement. If I ever heard one.
I'm not into it. Like, I'll be honest with you, I haven't watched a war movie in 18 years. I had enough of it then and there to do me for a lifetime.
Right.
And I'm more about trying to promote peaceful things. I don't mind the physical fitness aspect of all of that, but there can be a point where I think people lean into it a little bit too much, and it's like they're trying to get ready for an attack all the time. Like, they're living their life through fear and warfare. And I want to try to live my life somewhere beyond that, where we're making an impact on people and a change for good. There are good and bad things about the military, and there are some righteous wars, I'm sure. It's just that we haven't gotten into very many in a long time.
Oh, that's accurate. And I'm glad that you said having an impact on people, because, and again, Tyler seems to be watching this whole thing, Tyler, I appreciate you, man. He'll tell you one of the things that I always told guys was, and I tell my kids this, no matter what you're doing in life, leave people with a positive impact, right? You want to be able to walk away from a relationship, a scenario, an environment, knowing that you left a positive impact on that space. Amy asked me the day I got out of the Army if I was going to be okay. And I said, I think I've done enough where nobody can look at me and be like, well, what did you do for your country? I think I covered that. But more so than that, I was confident that I left a positive, lasting impact on the guys who served underneath me and beside me, that they know 10 years from now they can call me, right? And that's, I think that's one of the things that absolutely comes out of the military is you're always doing that, playing that game of I'm training my replacement, because it's not the civilian world. Once you get to the management position, you could sit there forever if you wanted to, and nobody's ever going to take your job. In the military, they're going to take your job. Somebody's going to maneuver around you. They're going to get the position that you applied for. They're going to do all these things. You're always training somebody to be better than what you were. And if you can find a way to do that and leave a positive impact on people, that's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
I had some staff NCOs that I will always be thankful for the impact that they made in my life when I was in a difficult place as a young Marine.
Yeah, and those people are going to live with you forever. And I hope that, and I still get calls from the guys that I served with, and we do a reunion every year with some of the guys that I went to OIF 1 and OIF 3 with. I went through a weird transition where I went to war the first 2 times with essentially the same group of people, because everybody was still in their same enlistment. So some guys got stop lost, right? But it was essentially the same group of people. So I did Iraq in 03 and 05. And then when I did Afghanistan in 08, I went as an individual augmentee. And so
you're with a different unit.
Yeah. And I ended up on a personal security detail. I was on a PSD team. I was the only non-combat arms guy on that team, which is super exciting.
You weren't pumping JP8 that time?
Nope, not that time. No, I was wearing civilian clothes and driving around in a Suburban. So,
wow.
So oddly enough, I had pissed off my sergeant major, and that was his punishment. He thought it was going to be a shit gig, and it ended up being the coolest job that I did the entire time I was in. But then when I went back to Iraq in 09, I was taking the guys that I had trained. So the first 2, I was, E4 and below, going into a war zone with a bunch of guys who had never been to war. Because like my squad leader, I remember I had one squad leader who was in Panama and Grenada and all these other places. And he was the only one that had any remote experience with combat, because most of these assholes joined after Desert Storm and carried into the towers falling, and they had no experience in that environment. So we were a bunch of idiots just running around in the desert, staring at each other going, what are we going to do next?
So right after 9/11, when I went in, nobody had any ribbons. A couple of guys, like you said, they had been in a few random engagements, or maybe they had been in and they were in the Gulf War, the first one, and they had a big stack. Aside from that, I mean, most people had a national defense and a good cookie. So,
yeah. And then, so, I mean, I guess I was fortunate to a degree where I saw the beginning of the war and the end of the war in Iraq. So, because in my 2010 deployment, we were part of the demob process. Wow. We were going through years and years worth of connexes and all this shit that had been left out there. I mean, we were finding all sorts of shit. Oakleys, camelbacks, plates, like stuff that these sergeant majors would order for morale things and then never actually disperse them. And then they got left in a connex. They went back to the States, and it had been there for 8 years. And you're like, all these Benchmade knives and Gerbers and all this cool shit. You're like, what do we do with it? We're like, we're keeping it, but you also got to see the growth of the infrastructure in those spaces too. And you got to see what that looked like from an operational standpoint. And I think for folks who know me in this industry, they know that I'm an operationally driven person. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of military vets are, because we are just so indoctrinated with operations. And how does each piece complement each other? And what I see with people who never served is they don't understand that operational integrity a lot of times, and why that's so important. Because if something falls off, you have to compensate for it, and the structure has to be there in order to compensate for it. If everybody's just running down the street doing whatever the hell they want, you're not going to survive a small catastrophe, let alone a big one. And we see it a lot, especially with roofers in our industry. I always tell people you have to beware of the sophomore curse. And because the first year, the first $1 million that a roofer makes is them and 3 buddies standing at the bed of their pickup truck and say, I'm going to go sell roofs. I've been working for this company for X amount of years. I can do this. After you make that first $1 million, then you have to actually transition it into a business. So then now I have to run a business. Now I need to understand operations and what that looks like. It is a huge necessity to have that skill set, to be able to sell, to be able to network, and to have that family environment that you have with that small group of people when you start it. But once you make a certain amount of money and you actually have to treat it like a business, because Uncle Sam's going to treat it like a business, right? So now you're getting into business conversations, and you have to not have so much pride in your way to say, I don't know this particular vein, but so I need to bring in somebody who does, right?
Yeah, sure.
And you see it. I mean, and you're a good example of somebody who's an influencer, so to speak. I want, all these personality things that you and Jackie do, and it makes sense why you are where you're at based off of the your ability to influence the space, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's a military learned thing. I think that's just who you are as a person.
No, that's who I am as a person. You're exactly right. And that's what would have kept me from being the 20-year guy or whatever. So you and I are wired quite a bit differently. You are that operational guy.
Oh,
look,
yeah.
You re-enlisted. You stayed in. You did all of that stuff, and now you've thrived in that operational role in the industry as well. I think it's probably harder for people like me to fit into such a structured environment like the military. But when I was young, I wanted and needed the structure so badly that I took to it very well. I didn't stay in for very long. I was an E3 when I was in Iraq. I ended up getting out as an E3, but I was meritoriously promoted as squad leader. I was a first class swimmer. I was the guide in combat training, and I was just a junior enlisted Marine when I got out to the fleet. So I'm sure that I could have had some opportunities there, but eventually I probably would have gotten a little bit tired of too much structure, I'm sure, at some point.
Were you a Hollywood Marine?
Yeah.
Or were you okay. So, again, I only know that exists because I married into the family of Marines, right?
Oh, right.
Her brother, neither of her brothers were Hollywood Marines. And
okay.
they always used to talk shit about it. And I was like, I don't understand this. You're gonna have to explain this to me. So give me the cliff notes of what the difference is for some people who may be watching this that aren't familiar.
Okay, well, so when I went in, all men that were that enlisted from west of the Mississippi River
I already love where this is going.
Went to San Diego. No, and all the women went to Parris Island, South Carolina, and the men from the East Coast, went to Parris Island. Now the guys in Parris Island, they make the jokes, oh, did they issue y'all sunglasses on the first day? And no, they didn't issue us sunglasses. But in combat training and during basic, we had hills and mountains in Southern California to climb, to hump up and down. And the guys in South Carolina, they had, real bad humidity, heat, and biting flies. They call them sand fleas and all of that stuff. So I think they're different environments. Both have their unique challenges. But essentially, if you didn't go to basic in San Diego, you're jealous that the other guys did.
So we have a similar thing for the Army, right? So we have 5, I think at the time when they might have changed now, but it was Fort Knox, Fort Benning, Fort Jackson, Fort Leonard Wood. There might have been one or two other ones. I'm sure there is, but I went to Fort Knox. And so everybody who went to Fort Knox, their claim to fame was you had to climb Agony and Misery, which were these just ridiculously big hills. Right. And guys who went to Fort Jackson, it was, but we had to run on the beach and lose sand. And there was everywhere you went, they had those things that they were like, this is where I'm from is known for. Right.
Right.
But I remember, and you kind of see it because the Army wears unit patches, the Marine Corps doesn't. Right. So you would see, I was in the 101st Airborne for 10 years. And when I remember moving to Fort Carson, Colorado, which is the 4th Infantry Division, and my sergeant major saying, hey, you need to take the Screaming Eagle off your shoulder. You need to put the 4th Infantry Division patch on. And I was like, I fucking earned this 4 times. I'm not taking this off. And it was this weird, forced pride. Right. Wow. And, coming from a unit that had so much history and so much notoriety to then go to a unit that didn't, and they wanted you to kind of conform to what they were doing. To me, it was just complete bullshit. And I remember struggling with it on a big level. And I think that's the big difference between the Army and the Marines, even though there's so many things that parallel the two, is we wear all of our shit on our uniform, right? You can just walk up to somebody and be like, okay, that guy jumps out of planes. He's been stationed here. He does this, he does that. The Marine Corps just wears the EGA and you guys move on about your business. Right.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Not my cup of tea. right? But for
It's
guys
interesting,
who,
there's a lot of cool traditions in every one of the services. A lot of great Marine Corps traditions. But when I was in Iraq, we were taken over for the First Cavalry Division,
hmm,
the Mule Skinners. They were pulling out big Army unit that had been
mhm,
at Al Assad since the first wave,
yeah,
and we took over for them. And unfortunately, during the first few days we were there, one of their OH-58s hit a wire and went into the Euphrates. And we helped salvage that helicopter and the pieces of it for them. And I remember them doing their ceremony with the missing man, and they had their
hmm,
cowboy hats and the swords and the
yeah,
boots.
the
And
Stetsons, yeah, yeah.
it was a really neat experience.
Yeah, and so yeah, again, you're right. I mean, there's traditions, and the army is kind of broken down into a couple different things. You have the combat arms guys, and then you have the cav guys who, and there's going to be a cav guy watching this at some point who's going to tell me that I'm completely full of shit. That's fine. They're like there's your infantrymen, and then there's the cav guys, and the cav in their mind are better than the infantry guys, and then the artillery guys are combat arms, but they're not infantry guys, and you just kind of live in this weird space there. And over the years, they kind of instill those traditions, and especially when you go into combat. Like I did my spur ride in 2009. So not being a Cav Scout, you can still do certain things to earn your spurs and your Stetson. Right. And so I have my order of the spur by the Cav, and I can do all, but I never wore them, but I earned it. Right.
Wow, that's
Which
really
is,
cool.
it's cool to have, and you're kind of flipping through your book of shit, and I see some of your stuff behind you, to kind of be able to look back and see some of that stuff. But, I think that the traditions are what keeps a lot of that stuff alive. Right. And you want to hold on to that. And then you have to also realize that when you get out in the civilian world, most people don't know shit about those traditions. Right. And I think where the Marine Corps absolutely has the advantage there is that no matter where you go in the world, they know the Marine Corps. And I could go to Korea and be like, well, I was in the 101st. And they'd be like, that means absolutely nothing to me. Right. Or I could say I was in the Marines, and they'd be like, oh, we know the Marines. I mean, you have those few things that the rest of the world understands what they are. And as we're kind of closing this out here, do you have, after your years of experience and knowing that you struggled for the first couple of years after you got out, is there anything that you would tell people to help ease that transition and translate those skills and enter the civilian world as somebody who is productive and somebody who is capable? Because I think that's something that you inevitably hit when you get out, is you lose that sense of self-worth to a degree, because your entire life is centered around that uniform and the people that you're around and all that. And you are no longer in that space anymore. And you have to battle that. Well, I'm not that person anymore. That self-worth that I can walk into a space and I know, because the people around me have my back, I can handle this scenario. Now, all of a sudden you're kind of floating in open sea. Is there anything that you kind of would impress upon people who are, because we get a lot of calls, I'm sure you do too, where guys are like, hey, I'm getting ready to get out. Do you think this is a good industry for me to get in?
First of all, I would say I'm the last guy that goes and tells everyone that they should go to college or get a degree. But for veterans that are coming out and they're struggling to find that self-worth, I say take advantage of the educational benefits. I was able to use the GI Bill to go back to school for commercial aviation. I got my pilot's license, my instrument rating, and that was a really important thing for me to do, to prove to myself that I could still do things, that I was going to be okay, that I was going to get back on my feet, because the military had me on 16 different medications, which 10 of those I had to wean myself off of for 9 months to be able to get the FAA medical. And I was scared to death. I didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
And for me, getting off of all that medication cleared my brain up enough where I could go back to college, and then I was challenged and I began to learn and grow a lot as a person. So I'm thankful for those benefits, number one. Number two, you can't internalize everything forever. You've got to deal with some of this shit.
Yeah, no, I think both of those are absolutely great advice. And I wish that there would have been somebody there as I transitioned out that could have said that, because everybody's going to deal with it a little bit differently. But the bottom line is the same, right? Is that we're so desensitized and we're pushed constantly into a situation where you don't talk about those things. You have to isolate that to when it's available and convenient, right? Whether that's grieving, whether that's dealing with stress, whether that's whatever, it's on the military's time. So when you get that time later,
The Marine Corps was very bad about this, especially when I was young. They just said, "Hey, suck it up, shut up. You're a Marine, you're fine." But there was a DFW Marines group on Facebook, and I think they eventually banned the group because people were selling guns or something on there. And it was rough after a while, Daniel. Every month we would lose a local Marine to suicide.
Yeah. And as much as we bring exposure to that, and as much as we all pay attention to it, we want it to go away. I'm going to say something that's it's going to sound uber insensitive, but one of the things that I don't think people take into account is a lot of the mental health issues and a lot of the battling depression and anxiety and all those things existed for a lot of these folks before they went in. And all the military did was amplify them.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure that's very true.
I think the military has to, at some level, get better at screening those things instead of worrying about, hey, I tore my meniscus in high school, right? Or, hey, I dislocated a couple fingers, so you can't come in. Mental health, when we look at the after effects of military service, we all know that there's a physical toll, right? Your knees, your back, your shoulders, all those things. Guys aren't killing themselves because they lost a leg. Guys aren't killing themselves because they dislocated their shoulder. They're killing themselves because of the massive amounts of PTSD and depression and anxiety. And so until we can figure out a way to eliminate that on the front end instead of trying to band-aid it on the back end, it's never going to get fixed. And unfortunately,
I think they've researched. I read about they were researching a drug therapy that would prepare your neuroreceptors to where when you're in the combat environment, it doesn't impress the same things upon your brain that it has in the past that has triggered PTSD in people. So they are looking into different things. I just hope that something comes together to provide those resources to people.
Yeah. What's that show on Netflix right now or on Amazon, The Terminal List? That's the bullshit they were trying to do on The Terminal List, and all these guys came back crazy. Have you seen that yet? You should watch it. I know you don't watch military stuff.
They tried to inject Botox all around my head at one point, and it freaked me out. And I stopped going to the VA. When I got TRICARE, I started going out in town because the VA standard of care is not what it should be.
It's awful. And I know there's probably some people laughing when you said putting Botox around your head, but like, people don't realize Botox isn't just to get rid of wrinkles and fine lines. There's a lot of places that you can inject Botox into joints and other places in your body that are actually incredibly beneficial if you want to go.
It's one of the standard of care for TBI treatment stuff. I never wanted to be on a bunch of opiates and painkillers, and I never was.
Yeah,
thankfully. But over the years, I've learned to deal with a lot of the things that I've been through, and I'm appreciative to be in a lot healthier place than I was back then.
Yeah, I wouldn't change anything, man. I look back at it and I have multiple TBIs from my years in service, and the VA sucks at taking care of those. They're like, let's just put you on a constant maintenance drug and do this. And I've avoided medications like the plague for years. So you just you get to a point where you just deal with it, but I wouldn't change any of it, me personally. And I know that there's guys that are going to have differing opinions on that.
I mean, that's what made you who you are today.
And that's exactly right. And I know that if it wasn't me in a lot of those situations, it would have been somebody else. And, there's always that fall on the sword mentality, right? Like if it's going to be somebody, I'd rather it be me.
And something we didn't mention a minute ago that I thought about that a lot of veterans have dealt with, I've dealt with it, I'm sure all of us do, is the survivor's guilt of coming home.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, that's a whole nother hour worth of conversation, man. Tyler, the guy who's on here, him and I were together in 2010 when we got attacked on a combat outpost and we lost a soldier out there. And I made sure that him and the other guys were safe. And this is a very Cliff Notes version of this story, obviously. And when I left them where they were safe, I was fine. And when I came back, I was covered in blood and they thought that it was me. And I remember telling those guys, give me 5 minutes to collect myself before I come and have a conversation with you guys. And it's a complete and utter fucking shit show, right? But again, you want to talk about not being able to explain what that looks like to people. Only guys who have lived stuff like that can truly understand what it is. And then you deal with the fucking survivor's guilt of it, and you see the release that they send the families, and you're like, this isn't what happened. And then you have to play that moral dilemma in your head of, do I correct this, or do I just let them passively grieve in their own way? Yeah, that is a massive, massive thing. And again, not something I'd wish on anybody, but it's a burden that I'll carry. So, I mean, it's kind of a shit deal, man. And you can see it. You could see it in people's faces, because they start talking about the traumatic experiences that they've dealt with, and inevitably, you see there's just signs. You see the glaze over their eyes, you see the furrowed brow, you see it, and you can see them processing that scenario over and over and over again in their head, and figuring out, how much can I talk about before it becomes judgment? How much can I talk about before it becomes this unwanted sympathy? And it's something that, as combat vets, we're always going to deal with, to a degree, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so. Daniel, thank you so much for having me on, man. This is terrific. I don't know did you see what I wrote the other day about Audie Murphy?
I did. And it was funny, because one of the guys that I served with, so I don't know if you know this, but being a Marine Corps guy, and then we'll shut this down and we'll all say goodbye. But so the Army has what's called it's the Audie Murphy, the Sergeant's Audie Murphy Club. Okay. And it is basically kind of your creme de la creme of NCOs, right? And they take only sergeants in there, and you stand in front of the board. It's all military history stuff. You have to be physically fit. You have to be shit hot across the board to get recommended the Audie Murphy board. And one of the guys that I served with had his Audie Murphy recognition. And when you posted that, he sent me a message and was like, hey, what are you guys doing with Audie Murphy? And I was like, it's a play on words. It is hey, this is somebody who is the most decorated person in history, and exemplifies that perseverance. But then on the flip side, we're talking about Murphy's Law. So it is, you can be as prepared as you want and tenacious as you want. You also have to understand that shit is going to happen, and you're going to have to deal with it.
So I understood the name as soon as I read it, and I thought, that's the coolest name I've ever seen.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, TJ, I appreciate your time, man. I'm going to let you jump out, and I'll give you a call or shoot you a text after I get off here, man. I appreciate your time for sure.
Thanks, Daniel. See you guys later.
Thank you. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. We went a little bit over the hour that we were anticipating, but I think that we got into some good points of conversation. And, I think that seeing some of the feedback, even though we didn't expect to see a ton of people on here, I think the feedback was good. And, we're looking forward to bringing some other people on here and having some more further in-depth conversations, because the reality of this situation is we transition out at some point, and every one of our experiences have been different. And I know my experiences and how they've, turned me into who I am as a person. And I want to dive off into how some of these other folks that we know in the industry, and in other industries for that matter, just any industry, how they got to where they're at based off of the implementation of those military skills and all that kind of stuff. So we appreciate anybody who jumped on to watch it. We've had a few reactions, some great comments, and, we look forward to doing this again next week. So thank you, and we'll see y'all next week.